This video is brought to you by Exodus 90. More from them later in the show. Well, the man who was Thursday. Thanks for hanging out with me.
Hey, thanks for inviting me on, dude. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, for sure.
I enjoyed talking to you. We've met a couple times. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. I first met you, obviously, when you were working on Pints with Aquinas. And so we've just kind of kept in touch over the years. And I've always kind of appreciated hearing your perspective on various things from time to time, and especially seeing what you're posting on the interwebs. But I thought we would just jump right in and get right into the juicy stuff. So let's talk about Matt Fradd joining the Daily Wire. Let's get your hottest take on that.
I have, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. I got a lot of likes from even people who were mad about that, which is not why I did it, but it was just like, I was just like, please stop asking me about this. I'm not.
Yeah. No, I figured I didn't actually want to talk about that. I didn't want to put you on the spot.
No. But, I figured you were making a joke about me being like so hard line about like, just, I'm not going to talk about this.
No, that's good. That's an admirable trait, actually. It is kind of ironic though, because for people who are worried about Matt being, I don't know, manipulated or having the independence of his voice diminished, they might be alarmed to know that you were actually the puppet master this whole time anyways. You were the guy you were the wizard behind the curtain who was really pulling all the strings of Pints with Aquinas this whole time. So
yeah, since the beginning, since 2016, when I was a 17-year-old working at Kroger.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that part of the story.
Yeah,
so you're an interesting character that people are going to want to know about. Are you still going by Thursday? I know that there was some.
I go by Thursday online for just kind of branding stuff. I used to not like use my real name online at all. It was a weird thing. I guess I just had to like come to terms, or not. That therapizes it in a weird way. I just didn't want people who didn't know me to pretend they did. But then what happened over time is I had created a character I was playing, and separated the two. And so I just started going by my real name for a while, and then I realized that I kind of gotten over that and was in a place where it was just like, I don't care, you can call me whatever you want. So unless like my real life friends, like people who I know in town, I'm like, you cannot, do not call me that, you know?
Yeah. It's funny because I didn't have any foresight when I started my YouTube channel, and I fully expected it to be just kind of a personal side project where I was just kind of practicing videography. So I didn't think like, I need to give this a name. I didn't go through any kind of branding exercise. I just used my username, which is of course my own personal name. But looking back, I kind of wish that if I had known what I know now, I probably would have come up with some sort of a pen name, because you do have those interactions, right? Like there's people who only know you through your online presence, and they approach you with the same kind of familiarity that like, your personal relationships do. And there is a difference, right? And it would be nice to kind of be able to immediately respond accordingly, right? Like, what's the context of this relationship? Is this somebody who knows me through my public persona? Is this somebody who knows me personally? And then, you can kind of adapt to those scenarios. But, I didn't have that foresight, and I didn't expect that, I would start to fill into this role. But yeah, I'm kind of jealous of people like you that have a good name like that.
Funny enough, it was my gamer tag. So, which I think gives me cred for our topic because I still go by my gamer tag online. But it was my gamer tag. And then when I moved to Steubenville, before I even started working for Matt, he knew me, had seen me talk to him a couple times on locals. So I had to introduce myself by Thursday. And then he just called me Thursday. And so him calling me Thursday on the show kind of happened by accident because he just kept calling me Thursday. So it was never like a hard decision that happened until I was like, don't call me that anymore.
Was it just an absent-minded thing on his part, or was he deliberately kind of giving you a tough
He thought
time?
it was really cool. And then I told him why. He was like, why is it Thursday? And I was like, oh, it's a Chesterton character. I really like that book. And there's some like the very few physical descriptions you get of Thursday. I was like, that kind of Like if I were cast in that movie, people would think, "Oh, that's actually a pretty decent casting."
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember
So
how he's described in the book, but I could see it.
light
Yeah.
hair with blue eyes and like sharp features.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Like that's about it.
Yeah.
So it's just
Yeah.
like I read that and I was like, "Hey, that guy, he's literally me."
Yeah. Yeah. We all want freedom. Freedom to speak, to think, to worship. But what about freedom to govern ourselves? Because in the absence of effort, we become the sum of our appetites, which is what the world wants, because the more you succumb to your appetites, the easier you are to manipulate. But true freedom is the freedom to do God's will. Freedom is becoming the man that God created us to be, men of worship, sacrifice, and love. And to achieve that kind of freedom, sometimes we need an exodus from the world, which is why this January I invite you to join tens of thousands of men embarking on the Exodus 90 challenge, which is about growing deeper in your faith by training your body, your mind, and your soul through the power of asceticism in collaboration with a local brotherhood. Inspired by the Desert Fathers of the early church, it's helping tens of thousands of men from all around the world today. So if you're ready to take the first step, download the Exodus 90 app today and invite a few friends to join you to form a local fraternity. Just go to exodus90.com/Brian. Again, that's exodus90.com/Brian. You can join a brotherhood from all around the world for the Exodus 90 challenge, which begins on Monday, January 5th, to see if it's time for your Exodus.
Yeah, and then of course
So that's The Man Who Was Thursday for people who
The
don't know.
Man Who Was Thursday by
who's not
G.K.
familiar with that
Chesterton.
novel.
Yeah.
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 And then he also one of the great lines in that book that is now kind of my it's my YouTube handle and my Twitter now is Sanity Revolt, because there's this line that Gabriel, being surrounded with every kind of insanity from his childhood, revolted into the only thing that was left. He revolted into sanity.
Yeah.
So
No, that's good. Yeah, I kind of I don't remember that book well. It's vague in my memory. I remember it being really absurd, and like a lot of Chesterton, kind of just goes completely off the rails at the end, where you're just like, what is happening now? I'm completely
they're
lost.
chasing an elephant at one point.
Yeah. The first book I ever read by him was The Ball and the Cross, which was full of kind of sort of slapstick humor, but a lot of profound insight as well. But I was able to follow it along until the point where, they end up in the insane asylum, and then it becomes apocalyptic, and I just wasn't expecting any of that. So he's got, like a vivid sort of absurd imagination, obviously. And but I remember I really actually enjoyed The Man Who Was Thursday. I thought it was, some people hate it, some people love it, but maybe that's just the way Chesterton is in general.
That is Chesterton in general. People also don't like it because they're like, what does this mean? It's like, you're not.
Right.
Did you read the dedication poem? The dedication poem literally says to Edmund Clare Hugh Bentley at one point, only you shall understand what is written here within. You're not supposed to get it. Just be okay with that,
Yeah. But there are things that you can kind of pick up along the way. There's a lot of typology in it that
there's a lot of typology.
Does seem obvious. And there's a lot of commentary on sort of revolution and secret societies and things like that.
They all turn out to be feds.
Right.
They're all feds, dude. And then at the end is like one of the best ever meditations on the problem of suffering. So
yeah. Well, so there's your recommendation on The Man Who Was Thursday. So that was going to be one of my questions, why Thursday, but we obviously covered that. What about the man behind Thursday? What's your story? I wanted to ask you a bit more about how you got connected with Matt. You just kind of alluded to that there, but why don't we start with like your character journey? How did you you become the man who is Thursday today?
Well, I grew up, we were, very practicing, American Midwestern evangelicals.
Okay. I didn't know you were a convert. That's interesting.
Yeah. So we were all, my family, my mom, my dad, my sister, and I, and there's a kind of practicing Christianity in the Midwest that I don't think you find anywhere else in the world, in Protestantism, where it's very serious, but it's like, it is like very, very serious, but it's also, it lacks something.
Hmm.
and it's taken seriously in a way that I think a lot of Catholics and I think a lot of Europeans in high church Protestantism don't think that low church Protestantism can be taken seriously.
Okay.
But when I was about 12, my dad's a construction worker. Um, Now he runs very large projects as a superintendent, but at the time he was just a construction worker. And part
Hmm.
of what that is in America and Canada is a lot of driving because you have to drive to where the thing that's being built is, right? And the
Hmm.
closest thing that's being built to you is not always or often close, you know.
Yeah.
My dad's commutes were regularly over an hour, and he liked to talk radio. And at one point, the only talk radio station that he could listen to that was in range from the start of the drive to where he finished was um, the Catholic radio station, EWTN,
Okay.
in our area. And so he was listening to that, and he, through that, decided to convert. I was 12, my sister was 10, my mom was not converting. And so
Hmm.
the parish that he was going to for RCIA and Mass, the priest told him, like, well, if your wife's not converting, your kids are past the age of reason, it would be, you should wait, don't do it immediately, maybe eventually, but wait.
Hmm.
So my dad would wake up early on Sundays before us and go to Mass and then come with us to the Protestant church we were going to, but he was not participating in it um, in like the same way he used to, which
Hmm.
piqued a lot of curiosity. I guess another thing I should add that um, maybe Catholics won't realize is that like in low church, especially evangelical Protestantism, the youth do not go to the normal church service with the adults, right?
Hmm.
Like the
Hmm.
idea that there are lots of families in around is it's like pretty foreign, you know. Like either there's the Sunday school that's happening simultaneous with the main church service, or there's like a young person's church service.
Hmm.
Um, and at this
Like a
time,
youth
my
group.
dad, yeah, like a youth group happening simultaneous with the adults,
Yeah.
service with the music and the long sermon or whatever.
Hmm.
And my mom and dad had actually, they were having my sister and I go with them to the adults service
Okay.
um, already, which is, not common, but it also kind of made, like, I doubt I would have converted with him if I wasn't, because I would see him like, instead of, you know, standing and singing whatever, um, what's it,
Like the worship
contemporary,
song.
like the worship song, yeah,
Yeah.
the whatever praise and worship song, you'd be sitting there praying with this piece of string with lots of knots in it,
Hmm. Oh,
and I
really?
was like,
Okay.
yeah, right, which was a rosary, but in my mind as a 12-year-old, I was like, why is he just sitting there like with this piece of string with lots of knots in it?
Hmm. So he
So
wasn't really
eventually,
sharing his Catholic sympathies with you much at this point.
not especially, he was more focused on he was making it evident that he was doing something different, but he wasn't explaining it explicitly
Hmm.
in a way that was like, oh, I now believe that like this version of Christianity lacks stuff and you need to join me.
Yeah.
Um, and
Well,
I,
there's
I
probably a
think,
lot of apprehension on your mom's part. What
right,
was going
yeah.
on? Yeah.
So eventually I just walked into his bedroom one Saturday night and was like, can I go to church with you tomorrow?
Hmm.
Because at some point in my head, I went, I have to figure out what's going on.
Hmm.
Something is happening and I have to figure it out. So
Hmm.
I ask him, and he's like, "Yeah, of course. We're gonna wake up at like 6:30, which for a 12-year-old on a Sunday was a gut punch." But I woke up at 6:30 with him. We go to mass. First time I ever went to mass, and we're driving back, and I have this very distinctive memory that we're going up for communion. He's like, "Okay, go like this," and the priest blesses me, and I could tell that that was in place of communion, right?
Sure.
And my parents had taken very seriously communion, making sure that we were educated and had enough education or on,
So you would receive communion in your evangelical church?
yeah, at the
Yeah.
evangelical
Okay.
church. But before we were allowed to do that, we had done some like serious education on it, and like made sure that we were formed enough in the Christian faith and scripture to participate in that way.
Hmm.
So I had a sense that this was in place of communion and that I knew communion was important. So I asked my dad, like, the priest that did the thing, I think he told me I was going to get a blessing. So I said, the priest that gave me the blessing, do I not receive communion now at Park Chapel, which was the church we were going to? And he
Hmm.
was like, well, and this was a stroke of genius, honestly. Props to my dad. When you see this, he's probably going to see it later. This was a stroke of genius, Dad. He says, that depends. If you think you're going to be Catholic and come to church with me every week, then you can't.
Okay.
But it's okay if you don't want to, if you need time to think about it.
Hmm.
It wasn't a like you shouldn't. It was a you can't. If you're going to come to church with me and be serious about this, then you can't. And I kind of
Yeah.
sat there and thought about it for a minute. And the can't paired with the like
The voluntary
ritual
nature of
nature, the voluntary,
it?
but then the ritual nature of the mass
Okay.
immediately struck me because when public school kind of shot themselves in the foot with turning me into a reactionary because the like general religious education you get in, and I don't mean like religious, but education on all like world religions that you get in like American public school classes was very weird because every other religion was described as like very ritualistic and like there was these
Mm.
things you were doing, like all this,
Yeah. It's a thing you
it kind of,
practice.
it's a thing you practice. It affects every area of your life. And like the worship is like there's a lot of rituals and I guess
It's
ritualistic is, I
structured.
don't need to, structured.
Yeah.
And I'd never experienced that. I thought that was just something that we didn't do in Christianity. Like I thought it
Mm.
was unnecessary, like we'd grown beyond it.
Yeah.
So I'm at mass for the first time and I'm like, oh, this is what religion is.
Right.
Like I haven't been really experiencing, or I've never really practiced religion in the sense of like ritual and worship and structure.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, if that's the case, then like this is also what Christianity is. I sat there, it was like silent. He also did not, he said that thing and then he just sat there silently and let me think about it for like 3 minutes.
Mm.
And then I went, well, I guess, and I kind of paused and I said, I guess I'm not going to receive communion then. And I remember he kind of like he got a tear in his eye. Um,
Wow.
and,
And then he
so
goes,
that
"This
was,
is the way, son. Very
yeah,
good."
yeah. He just kind of was like, I'm very proud of you. Thank you. I'm very proud of you. I'm glad you made that decision.
Wow.
Um,
Are you the oldest of your
I'm the
siblings?
oldest. Yeah.
Okay.
So I started going to mass with him, and then I would go to the Protestant youth group or the
Mm.
Protestant church, and then also was going to RCI with him on Monday nights. But then on Wednesday nights, because there wasn't a Catholic youth group in the area for middle schoolers, I was going to the middle school youth group at the Protestant church, and this was
Okay.
my first experience with apologetics because
Mm.
because I would start asking they would say things and I'd be like, that's not what Father Dudzinski said.
Mm.
Right. And I would start like asking these questions and having these debates with the youth group leaders
Mm.
in middle school youth group, which was a very quick formation, right? Because I had to be able to like very instantly, it wasn't like I have to learn this so I know it. It was like I have to learn this so good that I can defend it.
Mm.
That became a very quickly and instantly way to learn the faith and kind of understand it as a holistic thing, and understand why I was converting and what was different. But I never really had a moment where I was like Mary never struck me as odd. I'd never even heard about it, but Mary never struck me as odd. None of it struck me as odd because once I saw Mass and realized, and my dad told me, no, the Eucharist is the physical presence of Jesus. I was like, well, and like the Pope makes these decisions. I was like, well, yeah, if this is true, then the whole thing is true. So whatever Father Jasinski tells me is true, and that's what it is.
Hmm.
Like I just have to come to an understanding of it.
Yeah.
So that was that. And, I eventually was in a high school young men's group that did a lot of good for me. That's relatively common in the Lafayette Diocese in Indiana and some of the outlying dioceses called the Knights of the Holy Temple.
Hmm.
And then I went to college and was involved with the Catholic Student Organization and Focus there.
And is this in Steubenville?
No, this would have been
No?
in Indianapolis. So I went to
Okay.
Indiana University, Purdue University of Indianapolis, which is a joint satellite campus of Indiana and Purdue, which is really funny because they do not like each other.
Hmm.
It's the big in-state rivalry for all the sports.
Okay.
But I was in an IU program, and so yeah,
What were you studying?
I started. My first major was actually going to be physics. I wanted to be a physics professor, and then I very quickly realized that Calculus 2 was not for me.
Okay.
Calculus 2 was way too difficult. Couldn't handle that.
Hmm.
So then I decided I wanted to study political science with a minor in philosophy.
Okay.
And I eventually dropped out, but that was what I was studying. That's what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
And so I did that, and I kept in touch with some of those friends after I dropped out. And then I was, living with my parents. I was working 6 12-hour night shifts a week at a Kroger. I was just miserable. And I was just listening to audiobooks because there's nobody in the store. They don't, just stocking shelves at 3 a.m. listening to audiobooks. And I got through all of Lewis's fiction, all of C.S. Lewis's fiction.
Okay.
I was like, okay, what do I listen to now? I was like, I used to listen to that Pints with Aquinas show. I'll listen to that Pints with Aquinas show.
Hmm.
So I started listening to Pints with Aquinas. And one of the recent episodes was Matt's first interview, or I think it might be his only at this point, interview with Mark Barnes, who works at New Polity on technology.
Okay, yeah.
And I was like, this New Polity thing. And then I remembered that there was another episode like a year or two prior with this guy named Jacob Imam on converting from Islam.
Hmm.
So I went back and listened to that, and I was like, wow, these guys are really smart. And I was at a point in my life where I was in some I was working 6 12-hour night shifts a week. I had come to kind of realize that the conservative movement in America had failed me and my entire generation. They didn't really care about us. Their main concern was the GDP and the economics. And if that meant sacrificing my generation's future, they were more than willing to do it.
Did you think of yourself as a conservative while you were growing up?
I did, yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah. And so I was in some very reactionary places. I got past like the groypers. Like I was well past them. I was,
Okay.
very, very, and part of the reason for that, the main reason was because nobody had ever taught me, and this is nobody's fault because it's just a thing that we as the church have kind of forgotten until the last couple of years in America. Nobody had taught me this Catholic social teaching. I didn't know it existed. And so it never occurred to me that the Catholic Church had political answers to my political problems. So I was supplementing my faith with a political ideology because I had never been taught or been made aware that the church had a political ideology or that the church encompassed a political ideology.
Yeah.
And so then I
think
found
most
New
Catholics
Polity.
do this.
They do this,
we
right?
We have our faith over here, and then, well, with respect to temporal matters or professional matters or political matters, that they don't intersect. And so I'll carve out something here and have a distinct, which is a very Protestant thing to do, actually. And I'm not sure if this is more unique to like North America or specifically the United States. I don't know if a lot of European
I think it's just
Catholics
Western
kind of
in
operate this way.
general.
What's that?
I think it's just Western in general, right?
Okay, it could be. But you know, with people in places like France, they have an intellectual heritage, right?
Yeah.
So they kind of grow up with being sort of saturated in a history of philosophy of a certain kind of flavor, right? And then the same in Germany, and then the same in Great Britain.
Yeah,
But
but they never really
Americans, we don't
pair
really
that
have
with
that.
Catholicism, do they?
Well, a little bit, because a lot of those characters, depending on where you're from, were Catholic, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So, like Alan Bloom, for example, like he makes the case that in France, I'm taking his word for this, but in France, their intellectual heritage is seen as either Cartesian or Pascalian, right? Either Descartes or Blaise Pascal are kind of like your choices, and they represent two different directions you could go. So in the case of Descartes, it's sort of this modern Enlightenment and sort of scientific way of thinking, and skeptical way of thinking. In the case of Pascal, it's more like a fideistic way of thinking, right?
Okay.
Which is this divorce of faith and reason, which is obviously a false dichotomy. But it does go to show that, like, if as a young French person, you're fluent in kind of these currents of thought, that's a lot. You've
Yeah, I
got
guess
a
so.
pretty strong head start, at least with a philosophical tradition, compared to what I got as a Canadian, what I understand most Americans to be
Yeah,
exposed
we
to.
don't get anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
And
guess
we
maybe
also
it
don't
is.
have our own philosophical heritage, right? Like there's a little bit in Canada, but it's mostly kind of tied into Great Britain, which, you know, there's a rupture there by virtue of us just not being Great Britain ourselves. And then same with the United States, right? Like your intellectual heritage is really kind of the founding of the United States, which is itself rooted in prior philosophical traditions that go back to Europe, right?
Yeah,
Which I don't think you're
English
familiar with.
common law. Yeah, which
Yeah,
we are taught. Yeah. So I guess, yeah, I guess it is uniquely Canadian and American.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I found New Polity and I realized kind of immediately that, like, oh, all these problems I have, like, I don't, like, I can just, the church has an answer to them.
Mm,
And within like 2 or 3 weeks of listening to New Polity, I'd listened to all of their Politics of Tyranny series, most of the Good Money series.
mm.
Um,
And this is their
and I was
podcast, I take
their
it?
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I was like, oh, I have to live wherever these people can believe these things and be living them.
Hmm.
Wherever people believe these things and are putting them into their everyday life, that's the place I have to live. Those are the people I
And
should
not just
live
merely
with.
because of like the philosophical, you didn't want to just kind of cozy up to a place where people are thinking certain things, but they're putting it into practice in the way that they're
Yeah.
living as community too, right? Is
Yeah.
that the kind of the attraction for
Yeah,
you?
that's the idea, the living as community. And then also Mark Barnes's music, which sounds really cheesy, but Mark Barnes's band Dear Other makes music which also like is an artistic expression of these philosophical
Okay.
and these ways of life, and it comes out of that. And I remember the moment I was like, okay, I'm moving. I was listening to Exodus and Redidus of Andrew Darkstar Parrish, which is Mark's first album.
Okay.
And there's this song called The Emperor of Ice Cream, which is hilarious. All of this is very Mark, for anybody who knows him. But then there's this line in the song that is, "Oh God, are you still into us? I wouldn't be, having fathered forth the universe of possibilities and palm trees to watch the weight with which we worship our college degrees. You can be anything you want to be," screamed to the cartoon I saw when I was 3, and now it's made a cartoon out of me. And I don't know what
Hmm.
about that specific like moment. I remember where I was in my car, like what street I was on. I could like go to it on Google Earth pretty easily. Um, but I was like, okay, I'm moving.
Hmm.
So I put in my notice at work and put a box of books and a box of clothes in my truck, and I put the mattress in the bed of my truck, and I just showed up
Wow.
with no place to live or a place to work.
Yeah. Showed up at Mark Barnes' house and just said, "Hey, I'm here."
Literally, no, actually, unironically, I called Mark and told him I was going to do it because we had talked about like, should I move to Steubenville? Like, I'd emailed him,
Okay,
should
so
I
you've
do
had some
this?
contact with him.
I'd emailed him and was like, should I do this? And he called me and was like, you should just do it.
Wow.
And then I had listened to that song. I was like, okay, yeah, this is what God wants me to do.
Okay.
I was like, God wants me to do this. Therefore, God will take care of me. So I'm just going to do it. So I call Mark on December 31st. I'm like, I'm coming today. And he says, okay, I'm having a New Year's Eve party at my house. You should show up.
Hmm.
So I showed up at the New Year's Eve party. And I was there. Yeah. So, and within a couple days, I had a place to live. And within a couple weeks, I had a job. And then a couple months into that job, I quit it because New Polity had built their wood shop out that's now part of the College of St. Joseph the Worker. And they needed somebody to manage that while it was just like a general open to the public wood shop. And I managed and did the maintenance on that wood shop, cleaned it, that kind of stuff. So taught some classes. So, and then kind of through God's timing, a blessing, somebody had called Jacob and said, do you know anybody who knows how to video edit? And Jacob said, no, but I know a kid who's really, really tech savvy and who can learn anything. He learns quicker than anybody I've ever met. And so he called me and said, do you want to learn to video edit? My friend wants somebody who video edits. And I was like, okay, it can't be that hard. It was not. It's very easy, actually. Videography, difficult. Editing, very easy. So I was doing that, and Jacob saw what I was doing. And he asked me if I wanted to edit the New Polity podcast, and I started doing that about a month after that. And then a month or two into editing the New Polity podcast was when Neil told Matt that he was going to be quitting, getting married, and moving to Colorado. And Matt said, do you know anybody in town who video edits? And Jacob said, yeah, I do. You should hire Josiah. And so Matt asked me after Mass one day, hey, come over to my house for a cigar. I was like, okay.
Had you met Matt before at this point?
I had met Matt like 3 or 4 times and we chatted.
Okay.
But then after Mass, he literally pulls me aside. He's like, come to my house for a cigar. And I was like, okay.
And Matt's a big deal at this point, I take it?
He's a big deal. He's a big deal. I mean, this is like 2022.
Okay.
July of 2022. So he's like a big deal. He's, and he was a big deal in me moving to Steubenville. It was really odd for him to just be like, hey, come to my house. So I go over there and he's like, hey, I want you to make me a portfolio. I want you to be my video editor. I was like, okay, yeah, sure. How long do you think it'll take you to make a portfolio? I don't know, 48 hours. Okay, send it to me in 2 days. That 48 hours.
And the portfolio was kind of like your trial run?
Yeah, he just wanted me to make a couple clips like he has on his channel and thumbnails like he has on his channel.
Okay.
That was not enough time, but I did it. I worked 40 hours in those 48 hours. I worked 2 20-hour days back to back to make that portfolio. I sent it to him. He was like, yep, this is good enough. You picked it up. You've picked us up and this is what you picked up in 2 months. You'll be fine. So
yeah.
6 months later, I started with Matt in January of 2023, and I worked for him for 2 years. So that's the whole story there.
Okay. What happened with the rest of your family? So did they all eventually convert?
Yeah, so my sister joined my dad and I about 3 months later. She was confirmed in the church Easter Vigil of 2012 with me and my dad. And then my mom joined the church Easter Vigil of 2013. And then my dad's mom, actually, my grandmother, was confirmed and brought into the church Easter Vigil of 2014.
Okay.
So
that's amazing. Wow. It's amazing how just the influence a dad can have as he does something that is curious to kids, right? Like I knew people who had pious mothers growing up, right? Mothers who would pray the rosary, things like that. But it never really sparked enough interest in them to say, hey, what are you doing, Mom? I want to do that too, right? But as soon as a dad does that, all of a sudden kids are like, what's going on, Dad? Like this happened the other day where my 5-year-old daughter, like we have a rug in our family room and it's an intricate rug, kind of like an oriental looking rug. And she was walking on it and kind of following the design, playing this little game with herself so as not to touch certain portions. It's don't fall in the lava kind of game for a 5-year-old, right? And I was just sort of sitting there not doing anything, watching her. And so then I got up and started doing the game with her just to hang out with her. And then the next thing I know, the entire family has like joined in and they're all like taking a grave interest and competing with each other because, the 5-year-old, it's not because the 5-year-old was doing this, it's because dad got up and started doing this too. And because dad's doing it, it's suddenly interesting, right?
Yeah.
There's just something about the influence of dads. And I mean, they've researched this statistically too, right? Like the strongest influence on kids retaining their faith or being interested in faith is whether or not their dad goes primarily, right? I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that's, yeah, you could look that up. It's not subtle. So it's interesting to hear your story about how, just watching and observing your dad sitting next to you and then be like, huh, can I go to church with you?
Yeah.
And it not take much for him to be like, Josiah, like you should as well.
Yeah. He never explicitly told me I should. He just offered it and I took him up on it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So how did things end with Pints?
when Matt moved, yeah, it was just when Matt moved,
Okay.
it was no longer feasible. So I moved on. I joined the Chastity Project. I do very similar work for Jason Everett now. Yeah.
Is the Chastity Project based in Steubenville?
No, it's totally remote. Jason Everett lives in Phoenix, and a lot of the other people who work for the company live different places around the country. So,
okay. So you didn't want to move down to, it was Florida that Matt went, right? Or
yeah, Matt. I don't remember the exact wording, but I remember we were having lunch, and he told me, and he was like, I know you know we're moving. I want you to know, like, you can come if you want. I know you're going to say no. I know Steubenville matters too much to you, and I respect that, but I want you to know that you can come if you want. And I just couldn't bring myself to leave Steubenville. So
okay. So what is so great about Steubenville for people who have never been there and have maybe heard things positive or negative? Give us the sell on Steubenville.
yeah, I don't know how I could put it into words. I could give you examples of stuff though, like.
But why are you so attached to it?
Yeah, I have my worldview and support system doesn't work outside of a functioning Catholic community, and I don't think you can find one in the United States as tight knit as Steubenville, Ohio. Yeah, just to give you like examples, like I have friends who, once a week come over to my house and play poker, but like, it sounds common, but I don't think maybe a lot of people realize how uncommon that is in the West now. That like, and I'm talking about like 5 or 6 guys every week. Yeah, for our generation, like 5 or 6 guys every week that aren't just going. We're not going to a bar. We're not doing. They come to my house. They sit in my kitchen or in my dining room, and we play low stakes poker, and we sit around and we talk crap and listen to whatever records. Sometimes we put on, a college football game in the background, or we just sit there and we talk, and it lasts like 5 or 6 hours. My best friend and his wife now have their 5th child. I've known them since I moved here, since about 2 weeks after I moved here. They only had 2 at the time. And the idea that a 26-year-old single guy can just walk in to somebody's house and all the kids, know him and like him, and he sit with them and talk to them and have dinner with these people, and like that doesn't happen in the United States anymore.
It is hard to believe. Like I will creep around on the Catholicism subreddit from time to time, mostly because I'm just interested in what people are talking about. What kind of questions are they raising? And is that something that we should talk about on my own channel? But a question I see over and over and over again from younger Catholics is, I have no friends. Where do I find young Catholic people? And I just think like there's got to be, the United States is a big, massive population, and with a lot of sort of diverse municipalities that you could move to, a lot of flexibility. Like you just picked up and left to Steubenville. like there's got to be places that people can go. And I think like there's nothing remarkable about where I live, or at least that's always been my default perception. But at the same time, like we have a similar kind of community dynamic where, yeah, we'll go over to somebody's house and there'll be like, someone will invite you over for dinner and you'll think, okay, yeah, we're gonna bring the kids over, and I've got 8 kids, and so it's gonna be a group setting, and because likely this family has a lot of kids too, and the next thing you know, there's other families there, there's people of all demographics, there's families, there's married people, there's single people. We're constantly running into people of all these different demographics that we have these great relationships with. Last night I was at a men's encyclical reading group that we host that has dads, has young single men at. We meet there once a month. There's constant things that my kids who are part of the homeschooling community are invested in, and so I don't know. I kind of take it for granted, but it sounds like I shouldn't, based on hearing from people that live in other dioceses and other areas, that's not really a common thing.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people kind of underestimate, well, I mean, this like, you can move, you can find these communities, but this is one of those like grievances that young men and women have in general, is the idea that I should have to leave to find these things. The idea that I should have to like move away from my family, take this huge risk, economically, socially, to live a life that would have been normal 20 years ago, it's an indictment of our society. And one of the things I've said often when this comes up, I said it recently on the Chastity Project show. There was a guy who called in and asked like about a lot of more economic and job things, and Jason was giving him good advice, and I just butted in. I was like, I want to make it clear that what Jason is saying isn't that it's right that it's like this. He's saying that it is like this, so these are the things you should do. And so I think one of the main problems we have politically in maybe the U.S. especially, and I think it's probably the case in Canada, is that the right often proposes these doesn't want to deal with the fact that there are collective problems. And the left doesn't want to deal with the fact that there are individual problems. Like the right wants to propose individual solutions to collective problems. The right wants to say, oh, you can't afford a house? Well, don't buy a phone and avocado toast and coffee and you'll suddenly be able to afford a house. And it's like, well, the math doesn't work out there. Right? Like, let's just do the math on that. Let's say I do that for 10 years. That's not a down payment on a house, especially considering housing prices keep increasing. And the left doesn't want to admit that, like, there are the collective ills they're observing can be fixed if you could form a society where people acted in an individually more healthy manner. And so you have these dual problems. And so you just can't, and the community thing is one of them, right? Like the idea, like the solution to speaking to an individual who can't find community and who feels lonely is do whatever it takes to find it. You need it to be a happy person. You need it to be fulfilled. You probably also need it to be saved, right?
Yeah.
Like you're probably
not going to survive as a lone wolf Catholic.
You're probably not holy enough to be a hermit in the middle of a secularly degenerate society.
Yeah.
The solution to you, an individual, is, I'm sorry, you probably need to pick up and move.
Yeah.
But the solution to the collective problem is we need to change things about our society at a state or collective level that don't make this a problem. And to have a holistic view of politics, religion, community, all these things, you have to be willing to acknowledge both sides of that. You have to say, like, well, on an individual level, we should be telling people, and this is kind of recently Ben Shapiro said, like, well, if you can't afford to live in New York City, you should move. You don't deserve to live in New York City. And it's like, well, that's not true, right? If you can't afford to live in New York City is, if you really can't do it, then unfortunately you need to move, but you do deserve to live there, especially if that's where your family has lived for generations. So we need
Right.
to change
Right.
things about whatever that is preventing that.
Mm.
And this is one of the great things about Steubenville to me is one of the things that I think we need, one of the easiest solutions to this change is that we need to make places which are inheritable.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is like, I love my family, but suburban Indianapolis is not an inheritable place because it's no different than suburban, you know, uh, Wichita. It's no different than suburban
Okay.
Nashville, right? It's just, we've created a
What does
massive
that mean,
places.
inheritable place? Like, what do you mean by that?
So there's
Just
no
pure
heritage to it.
economic
Like
terms? Oh,
no,
I
like
see.
it's the same, right? We've created a bunch of space in the United States that is nowhere because it's all the same. The houses
Yeah.
all look the
Okay.
same. It's the same businesses. There's no like
Sense of identity or
there's
culture or
no
whatever.
identity, there's no
Yeah.
culture. But in Steubenville, I live somewhere,
Mm.
right? There's a culture, there's a community, there's a place. There are places that I can, and this is the main reason that I just can't ever leave, is in my head, I want to have a family someday. I want to be a father. Part of that is doing the right things so that one day I'm the best father I can be. And I don't think there's another place I can live in America that will make my kids, like, that will make my future children saints as well as Steubenville will.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I would see it almost as a dereliction of duty, an irresponsibility to leave knowing that
Yeah.
I'm taking that risk on.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's part of that is because it's inheritable, because I
Mm.
can point and say, like, I worked there when it was not that, when it was this thing, and I helped make it this thing. And, you know, we participate, like, even just like, oh, we didn't work there, we didn't help build it. But like, I've been going to that place, that coffee shop, that, whatever for a decade at that point. And
Mm.
it's a part of my identity. Like, it's a part of the
Mm-hmm.
reason we're around. Like, these are our
Yeah.
things. We own them
Yeah.
collectively, we possess them collectively as a community. And one day they will be yours.
Yeah.
And in a way that you can't point at the seventh McDonald's within 7 miles and the 10th,
Yeah.
the local Target and the local Walmart and say, oh yeah,
Sure.
that's ours. That's ours. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think some of the best, well, some of my favorite movies are ones in which there are good characters, but also the settings and the locales that the events take place in are almost like characters in themselves, right? And they have their distinct, unique identity, and they create a mood, and they even contribute to the events of the plot, depending on what's going on, right? And so like Star Wars is like that, right? Like different planets will create different scenarios and create a different atmosphere for the scenery and that kind of thing. Another one that's maybe a little bit anathema for a lot of my audience is Harry Potter, right? And so Harry Potter has like Hogwarts, and it blends it with real places in the world that are kind of like what you're describing, right? Like that there are neighborhoods within England and within London and little suburban areas that have these qualities and these unique identities. And interestingly enough, like I've only been to Steubenville once, which is the time that I went to be on Pints with Aquinas, and that's when I met you, obviously. But that's the first thing it reminded me of was it feels like I'm on the set of a Harry Potter movie, because it's like there's this charming old architecture everywhere you go, but it's like it's really old, and it communicates like a history, but not like this ancient history, but like a history of people that you could almost, the echo of their history is almost still there within reach, right? And it's all kind of run down at the same time, right? A lot like Harry Potter. Like, so the world of Harry Potter is that wizards can create buildings and things like that, but they do it clumsily and sort of absent-mindedly because they take for granted that they just have this special power to do these kinds of things. So a lot of the things are neat and charming, but also sort of falling apart at the same time. And then they just magic it back together. It's sort of like their magic is like duct tape everywhere, right? And I felt like that was kind of the charm that I had glimpsed when I was there in Steubenville. And so it really does have a character. I don't know if the rest of the United States is like that. I've certainly been to places that don't really seem to have much character to them. But I'm Canadian, and I live in a place where it's, frozen tundra. And so I'm maybe more easily impressed than most people. But it sounds like, based on your story, while some people may resent picking up and leaving, maybe that's the thing to be doing. Maybe that's where we're being called to, as younger Catholics, and especially you as much a younger Catholic, is to find these communities, shelter together, create sort of a monastic vision of community that will draw more people to it, and there's an evangelistic potential in that too, right? Because people who are not Catholic or just not Christian even, who are starved for worship, for community, for culture, will maybe come into proximity with communities like what you're describing or what you have in Steubenville and say, wow, I didn't know this could exist, right? Like, I want this. And then hopefully, God willing, realize that what the key ingredient in all of this is the Catholic faith, and be drawn into that as well. I don't know. Do you agree? Do you think that that's sort of consolation in all of this?
I think so. I think that's true. I think that's true. The unfortunate thing is that I just don't think that, like, as we do this, it's going to go one of two ways, right? Either people are going to find these places and be satisfied with the replacement, or people are going to, in last-ditch desperate attempts, try to save the places that they are in, that they've been in for generations.
Sure.
And sometimes it'll work, and sometimes it'll be catastrophic, right? And I think you've seen that recently in New York City with Mamdani, right? Like, you can say what you want about Cuomo or Sliwa, but I think there's this moment that I think kind of captured the whole election, the New York City mayoral election, as they were having their like mayoral debate, and the moderator was like, "Where's the first foreign country you will visit as mayor of New York City?" And every single one of them was like, "I'm going to Israel." And then Mamdani goes, "I'm going to focus on the people of New York City. That's my first priority." And it's like, I could come up with a laundry list of problems with Mamdani, but
yeah,
that is clearly the correct answer to the question in that case.
Yeah.
Like, I'm running for mayor of New York City. I'm like, foreign country, like,
yeah, you're not a diplomat.
It's not. It's a mayor, right? Like, like, who's the? I mean, New York City has like all the diplomats and the embassies and stuff. So you might come up with a version of that question that's more acceptable. Like,
sure,
which of these embassies, which of these people do you want to meet with? But like, to say which foreign country are you going to leave to as a mayor is shocking. And so you look at Mamdani, and I think you have a lot of reasons he got elected, but one of them was that he actually was proposing solutions to fix the problems that New York City was facing, and not pretending that they weren't there, or proposing, or saying he was gonna his priority was visiting some foreign country, and yeah,
it seems like when I follow people like yourself, so Gen Z, conservative Catholics, it seems like politics is a high priority and high concern in a lot of the stuff that you're focusing your attention on. And I don't think I would say that about my generation growing up. I mean, there was the odd person, like within my own peer group, like my friend group specifically, there was maybe myself and one other guy who would sometimes have kind of political conversations, but for the most part, just wasn't really on our radar. We would talk about sports or movies or parties that we wanted to go to or we were planning on going to or that we had been to, or sort of the more immediate social situation. Is it true? Like, is my perception accurate
Yeah,
that politics is a
completely.
big thing for your generation?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I
Do you
helped my
think it's
buddy
too
move
much?
some
Do you think it's
math.
excessive?
No, I don't think it's enough, actually.
Okay.
Um,
Tell
I
me,
don't think
tell
it's
me about it. Why is it a huge priority for you guys?
because we don't have a choice anymore, right?
Sure.
I hate to just do well, I don't hate to do it. I'm going to do the cliche of pile onto the baby boomers a little, but the baby boomers did I know you're Canadian, but are you familiar with when the Falcons were leading the Patriots in the Super Bowl 28-3 and then lost?
No.
Do you remember this? Oh, okay. So this is an American meme in like almost the Dawkins sense, where it's like
Yeah.
a idea that means
It's like a
something in
mind
the mind,
virus.
a mind
Yeah.
virus, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sure briefly for you and for the non-American audience, the American football Super Bowl one year,
Hmm.
um, halftime, the Patriots are leading 28-3, right? So they four touchdowns to a field goal.
Yeah.
Like that, the game should just be over, right? Like, because if the Falcons are scoring that easily and the Patriots are having that much trouble scoring, like the game should just be over, right? Like you should know who's going to win going into halftime. And somehow the Falcons screwed it up and they lost the Super Bowl. And it's one of the reasons we think Tom Brady's so great.
Hmm.
Because he was the quarterback for the Patriots. He had the
Right.
second half of that game is legendary.
Okay.
All that's a tangent to say the baby boomers in America did the equivalent of that with an entire civilization.
Hmm.
They were leading 28-3 going into halftime and they somehow lost the game. You look at it, you're
Yeah. Yeah.
like housing was low, every day food was affordable,
Yeah.
wages were going up, and somehow 30, 40, 50 years later, it just keeps getting worse, right? Like,
Yeah.
let me look at this. So in 2005, the median age of a home buyer in the United States was 39, which that's pretty old. And that's prior to 2008, right? That's when it was really easy to get a house. So like
Yeah. Yeah.
that should have been when it should be really young, theoretically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In 2025, it's 59,
Yeah.
which means that in the past 20 years in America, the year the median home buyer was born has, for the large part, not moved. Which means you have, and 20 years is about a generation, which means you have an entire generation. It's not Gen Z, it's the millennials, right? That have never been able to enfranchise themselves and establish themselves in the American society, or achieve the American dream of, owning a home, having a family. And this contributes to all kinds of other problems, right? Like, it's pretty common in a lot of non-Western countries for married couples to live with the parents for the first couple of years, right?
Sure.
But
Yep.
in the West, that's not common, right? Like you need to feel like you're financially established to get married. So why is the average age of marriage going up? Well, maybe it's because for the last 20 years, the
They don't feel
a home
established.
buyer has not been, they're not being able to establish themselves, right? And like,
Yeah.
what other effects does that have? Well, young men need a purpose. They need to feel like they're contributing to society. They need to feel like they're growing. They need to feel like they're independent. They need to feel like they contribute. And they're just, I mean, I don't want to say this is like an indictment of them, but for the large part, due to societal factors, they're not. They're not contributing. They're not being able to. They're not being able to establish themselves in a way that would allow them to contribute. And so they become depressed and sad, and they become angry, and they become confused, and
Yeah.
then this affects the dating stuff too, right? Because women, when they're looking for a partner, are looking for safety and stability from a man, and men are not being able to achieve it because of economic and societal factors. And so, why are men lonely and unable to find women? Well, maybe it's because through societal factors they can't achieve the things which women rightfully desire in a partner. And And you can point to all kinds of factors that are causing this, right? Like after 2008, the Fed bought over $1 trillion in market-backed securities. Like the thing that caused 2008, because it was so fake and so like unstable and like a really bad idea. Afterwards, part of the bailout was not just giving the banks money; it was buying those mortgage-backed securities. But
Mm-hmm.
then the banks spent more money on more mortgage-backed securities and more financial sector fake, financial commodities, fake commodities. Um, and so the prices of housing have continued to increase. Inflation since COVID, in the last 5 years, home prices in the United States have doubled. And we talk a lot about in the United States, and I'm sure in Canada. I know in Canada because I followed Pierre Poilievre's one of his main campaign pitches was the cost of housing and the cost of inflation, right? Even
Yeah.
compared to the United States, I know it's worse in Canada than it is in the United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about on the right in the United States and on the left, and everybody talks about wanting to bring inflation down. But when you talk about the consequences of bringing inflation down, people don't seem super enthusiastic all of a sudden. Because one of
Yeah.
the things that's going to, if you say, well, inflation is literally up 100%, like it's 100% of what it was 5 years ago. If that comes down, then guess what? The price of your house is going to also come down by half,
Yeah.
right? And people just aren't willing to do that, right? They're no longer willing to sacrifice their immediate comfort for the good of a future society.
Mm.
And this exacerbates and creates a positive feedback loop in the sense that it like makes itself grow. Not positive in the sense that it's good, but it creates a positive feedback loop where housing, economics, just food, the things you need to live, car prices go up, and wages can't grow at the same rate. And then you, of course, add to that, let's bring in let's bring in the Biden administration's official number was 11 million illegals. So that's the Biden administration's official number. So probably at least 20. Some conservative think tanks have pinned it around 30 million in the last 4 years. And
Yeah.
you depress wages even further.
Yeah.
And what you get is these massive societal forces which are unavoidable on the individual scale, which make your life worse in every single way.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you say my life is worse in every single way than my parents and then my grandparents and the great grandparents and I want things to change. I want to change the way our society works to make my life better so that my kids also can have better lives. You're accused of being, socialist, or you're accused of being ungrateful or lazy, which creates resentment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and we don't have the vocabulary, we don't have the intellectual formation to understand all of these concepts. I mean, there's an economic dimension to it, there's a historical dimension to it, there's political theory that goes into this stuff, and then there's just general sort of prudence and sort of the individual responsibility that we have to form ourselves well, to be capable, to be diligent, to be prudent, to be to have fortitude, to just be good moral agents, right? All of these things are kind of necessary for the individual and then for a thriving, flourishing polity, which is just kind of scaling up the virtues of individuals into the community. We just don't have any of that formation, right? And it's kind of by design, right? Like modern progressive education was completely overhauled in the 20th century and transformed into what it is now. The older classical model of education was the liberal arts education. It was designed to produce a person who could be a liberal or free citizen, someone who, and not just by virtue of like a fiat saying, hey, you're free to do whatever you want, like liberalism per se, but because they were knowledgeable, they had certain kinds of skills, And they weren't susceptible to things like sophistry and deception and manipulation by like say, advertising or bad political pitches or just dishonesty, right? Like a good person is much less likely to be deceived and manipulated than a vicious person, as in a person with kind of riddled with vice, right? But we haven't been trained how to cultivate virtues. And without sort of that deliberate trajectory in life, we tend to accidentally fall into vice. And a vicious population is easy to manipulate and to exploit and take advantage of. So it definitely plays into the hands of sort of the insidious rich and powerful. And it's not to say that people who are rich and powerful are all insidious or vicious themselves, but you get enough of them and the temptations that come along with that. And yes, you have a huge problem on your hands. So your generation is kind of narrowing in onto the political dimension. You're looking at this and saying like, what the heck happened? This is not the life that my parents had, and that was maybe implicitly promised to my generation. Millennials and Gen X are just kind of like, what the heck? We're just kind of got our heads down trying to survive and pay the bills.
I think millennials started it, to be fair, not like started the decline, but I think they started the like looking around going, this isn't what we were promised, right? Yeah. But it wasn't bad enough that it became...
So I've got kind of like a half a foot in Gen X there. So yeah, I'm probably not a good spokesperson for what millennials are feeling as well.
I think you see like the younger millennials starting what we would pin as like Gen Z, like revolutionary, like reactionary politics. I think you see the start of that in like Occupy and Bernie Sanders, right? Occupy and then Bernie Sanders. So I think it kind of has started there. It's definitely gotten worse. I think you're right. I think Gen Z is doing it at a level that other generations just weren't, right? Like the normative position for someone in Gen Z is some type of reactionaryism, right? Like whether that be left wing or right wing. If you're politically
for
aware,
both
you're
men and women. You'd say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think if you're politically aware, you are some form of a reactionary on the norm. I think the idea that we have like mainline neoconservatives, Gen Z neoconservatives is like that's just not. Yeah, you're laughing. Like you're like that doesn't exist, right? Like the idea that they're like
it doesn't exist for my generation really either. I don't think, but I might be wrong about that.
Yeah, but you see, that's the point. Yeah, see, like it's getting further and further apart, and like the idea that there's like some Gen Z Democrat out there who's just like, thinks abortion should only be safe, legal, and rare, and is like generally like, gay marriage should probably be legal, but like maybe the trans stuff we should be careful. Like that's not, it doesn't exist, right? Like a 2003, a Bush conservative Gen Z doesn't exist, and like Clinton Democrat Gen Z doesn't exist. Like those two things are not there. They're gone.
When you look at the MAGA movement, and maybe not so much like the grassroots level, but like at the top, if we're talking about somebody like Donald Trump, it seems like when he talks about making America great again, that's what he has in mind. Like America was great like in the 80s, right? When things weren't so polarized, when the economy was more accessible to people, when the champagne was flowing in New York City, like sort of his own heyday. Do you think that that's what he has in mind, or does he have a completely different vision?
I don't think I could pin Donald Trump down. And I think that might be what he has in mind. I think that's probably what a lot of elder millennials, Gen X, and like the boomer conservatives have in mind. But the Gen Z MAGA wing of MAGA is much closer to JD Vance, which is like, we can't just go back, right? Because
we'll end up here again.
Right? You have to change some things, right? You can't, this is why the word conservative in a lot of Gen Z political circles is dying off, because it's like, well, we're not trying to conserve anything, right? We're not trying to conserve anything. Nothing, the things around worth conserving will only exist if we change all the other things that are going to eventually destroy those things. And I made this I made this YouTube video. I want to say it was like January or February of this year. Um, and I called it "The Laws All Being Flat." And it was a extended video essay on this quote from The Man for All Seasons, where Roper, so there's the, I can't think of his name. His name just escaped me. The guy who eventually lies in court about Moore for the governorship of Wales. I can't think of his name.
Yeah, I haven't seen the play
there's this
or the
young
movie,
guy.
but...
There's this young guy who wants a job with Moore, wants Moore to give him employment, and is claiming that so and so and these people are spying on you to try to catch you saying something that they can put you in prison for since you won't sign the oath. And it becomes clear very quickly that this guy is actually the spy, right? The guy saying that these other people are spies. And so he leaves. And William Roper, Thomas's daughter's boyfriend, says that he should, Thomas's daughter, Roper, and Thomas's wife all say, you should arrest him. Because he's a nobleman. He says, arrest him. He says, what law? He hasn't broken any laws. And Roper says, yes, he has. He's broken God's law. And Thomas says, well, then God can arrest him. And Roper basically says, I suppose you'd give the devil benefit of law. And Thomas More answers with, yes, I'd give the devil the benefit of law for my own safety's sake. I suppose you'd cut a great road through the law to get after the devil. And Roper answers, I would cut down every law in England to get to the devil. And More says, and when the law's all being flat and the wind blew and the devil turned around on you, do you really think you could stand then in the winds that would howl? And that's kind of been the conservative modus operandi since the 80s.
Yeah.
Going actually, I think, back into the early 60s. If you were to read some, I think you could find this pretty present in the late 60s in Buchanan's book, where he recounts Nixon's campaign for president in 1968. But it's kind of been the modus operandi of conservatism for a couple generations now, is that we have to follow the law, because if we cut down the laws, they'll come after us. And the point I was making in this video is the laws are already cut down. The devil cut down the laws to get to us. So you pretending to hide behind a stump isn't doing any good, right? Right? And you'll see this in these kind of weak conservatives. I don't know how familiar you are with American political drama and happenings, but you see these weak conservatives who, when Trump's like, hey, I think we should revoke ABC's broadcasting license if they don't make Jimmy Kimmel apologize for what he said about Charlie Kirk's murderer, because he lied. He knew he lied. Yeah. Well, the broadcasting license says you have to be operating in the public interest, and the public interest is not lying knowingly on a major political assassination. So if you're going to do that and there's going to be no consequence, then you clearly have violated the terms of your public broadcasting license. So he can either apologize or you can lose your license. And people are all up in arms pretending oh, this is the government attacking free speech. And it's no, this is the government using the law to win in this case, when in fact the government has attacked free speech under Biden. They were looking into, one of my close friends, Shane Smith, was spied on by the Biden administration for being a Catholic extremist. He said this publicly now in his most recent comedy special. He was spied on by these people because of what he said. The government spied on him, Or Trump will say maybe I should look back into arresting Hillary Clinton because I really could have done a number on her and I didn't. But then in repayment for not arresting Hillary Clinton for actually breaking the law, what did they do? They actually arrested Donald Trump for things that, if you were to look into it, are not really breaks in the law in the areas that they were claiming. And so the question isn't, should we cut down the law to get after the devil? The question is, are you willing to fight the devil, or are you going to sit there and be killed?
Mm.
And this is the answer to this. Like, this is the Trump weave, the weave. To get back to your question on like, why is it more reactionary? Why is it more political? Because there's no longer any safety nets, right? Like, it's an immediate threat. It's an
Mm.
immediate threat.
And so, what do you think Thomas More's example gives us like a Christian answer to that? Um,
Yeah, I think. I mean, so here's the thing, right? Like, he refuses to break the law, but he also refuses to abandon the truth.
yeah.
Um, and at a certain point in the United States, somebody is going to have to start ignoring these judges. You
Mm.
know, where because the judge, the first priority of the temporal power is the common good, right? Like, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to promote the common good,
Sure.
and
But that's a concept that is completely lost
right. But
on
this is what I'm saying,
politicians
right?
and academics, and
But this,
the only people, even Catholics, right? Like the only people who have any understanding of what the common good is are people who have actually studied the social teachings of the church.
yeah.
Which even the
But
people
this
that
is the
talk
thing I'm
about it a
saying,
lot
right?
are clearly not fluent in it.
Yeah. This is the thing I'm saying, though, is like the Gen Z, especially the Gen Z conservative, the young Catholic men who are really into politics, have a pretty, and this might be, I don't think this is prideful because I just think this is honest. I think my generation, I think young men between the ages of 23 and 35 probably have a better understanding on average of the common good than all of the millennial and all of the boomer generation, all of Gen X,
Mm.
like on average. The average millennial doesn't understand the common good and doesn't
Yeah.
understand what it means as well as the average Gen Z Catholic. I don't think that's, and maybe somebody can call me on that and point to where I'm wrong, but I look at what's going on and I see Gen Z Catholics looking at political circumstances and saying, well, this thing isn't for the common good. And if there's a
Mm.
law in the way, the priority isn't obeying, arbitrary laws written down. The priority is common good. So
Hmm.
we should, if necessary, ignore the law to promote the common good. And you see
Yeah.
these people recoil from that. And I think it's naivete, but I think it's also a misunderstanding of what Catholic politics is, right? And this
Sure.
is like to
Yeah.
your answer to like, does Moore propose this example, right? Because Moore doesn't have power, right? His power is taken from him. But
Sure.
insofar as he had power, he didn't use it to promote evil. His power was taken from him because he wouldn't use it to promote evil. So
Right.
the answer to this is like, well, if we can try to not let them take our power so that we can use it to promote the good.
Mm.
And that's not, I don't think there's a problem with that. I don't
Mm.
think you can find that problem in the Catholic worldview and Catholic history and Catholic social teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the big dangers with being politically focused and just dialed into everything that's going on in the political scene, especially if this is primarily through headlines or the conversation that tends to dominate on social media, is that we tend to focus our attention on the big, the central, and the remote, right? And there are people that's where their attention should be because they're placed in those positions. But for most of us, that's not, we have no influence there. And this is true of Catholics too, right? When we talk about Catholic headlines and the intrigues that go on in the church, we're thinking, what's going on with the Pope? What's going on in the Vatican? What's going on in the Curia? But it's like, and I feel some of the burden of this as well as somebody who has some of a voice within the church, is that people say, hey, unless you denounce that thing that just came out of Rome, or unless you covered maybe favorably, you're not doing your job. And I just think like, well, there's not a lot of influence I have in Rome, right? And where I do have influence is primarily in my personal life, primarily at the local level. I'm an exception to the rule because I do have a YouTube channel, but for most people who are spending all of their energy and attention on things that are remote from them because it's big and noisy and seems like it's the most important point of focus. That's not Catholic social teaching either, right? I mean, subsidiarity says that our attention should be on the local and the small, to whatever degree we have influence there. And that really is where I think most of the change can be affected. It's in school boards, it's in maybe municipal politics, it's certainly in your own family and in your own workplace. But the danger, I think, is that people are all looking at like the federal level. They're all looking at what's going on in Washington, or in the case of Catholics, what's going on in Rome. And I think that just becomes a big distraction, and it plays into this idea that all the solutions are big, remote, and centralized, when that's the opposite of what Catholic social teaching teaches.
I would agree with you if we had a society that was subsidiarity based.
Mm.
The way I explain subsidiarity to people is I say that it's the idea that the higher levels of authority are contingent upon the lower levels of authority, right?
Okay.
If the lower levels are contingent upon the higher levels, then it's not subsidiarity; it's all top-down power.
Sure.
And I think in the United States we have a top-down power, and the problem. I agree. I agree with you. Like, you should try to affect change at the local level as much as possible. But the problem is, let's say you're in Springfield, Ohio, and you're trying to affect change in your community. And then the spring of 2024 rolls around, and the Biden administration at the federal level drops a bunch of Haitians on you that start eating your house pets.
Mm.
Like this is the situation we're in, right? Where that sounds great until you're in these situations where the federal government is the one that is actually affecting your life the most.
Yeah. But the question then becomes, what can Brian Holdsworth, the individual citizen with a day job, do about that? He can speak up, he can be noisy, and that might affect a little bit of change. But at the end of the day, is it sort of an exercise in futility for me to rail against, this remote, powerful system that is way beyond the reach of my potential influence?
I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the United States, I don't think that's the case at all. Like, there's been multiple instances since the Trump administration has taken power where loud complaints, like massive backlash on Twitter to a Trump administration decision has resulted in its reversal. Because they know where their base is, they know who they need to care about, they know who they need to protect.
But who is it that affects those kinds of situations? Is not people with massive followings on Twitter that really kind of instigate those kinds of
but unless you participate
effects?
in them, then it just falls flat.
Yeah.
I'm not saying to like take it and make it the main thing in your life, but I am saying that you should be participating in them. You should be aware and participating and contributing your voice to the massive voices who are asking for the right thing to be done, because otherwise, like, these changes that have happened in the United States wouldn't have happened, right? Like Vivek Ramaswamy got ousted from Doge because he said something really offensive about Americans and white people in school, like white school cultures and versus Indian and Asian cultures, and then he got ousted from Doge, because people are like, that's not okay that you said that, and enough people complained about it, enough people made their voices heard, enough people contributed their small voices to the large voices, that the administration had to be like, well, the people don't trust this guy anymore, right? And the same thing has happened with a couple of the administration's confirmations. Now they're lacking. They're still doing confirmations. They're still sitting on them in the Senate because they're lazy and idiots and terrible people. But some of them have happened explicitly because people have said, like, if you don't do this, we're not going to vote for you, right? Like, the current Senate Majority Leader, people didn't want him to be the Senate Majority Leader, and we're not okay with it, and we're threatening to vote against people who voted for him. But then, because of all the backlash, the calling of the senators, the backlash on social media, he made a bunch of like promises of things he would do, and that happened with the last two House elections, right? It became such a big thing on social media that the elected speaker had to make promises before he was elected towards the younger, more reactionary wing of the party. And so I think you're right. Like, those are the things you should be focusing your everyday energy on. But you also need to be aware enough of what's happening in Washington that when necessary, you can lend your voice to the people who haven't have the ear of the administration so they can say, look, here's this massive amount of people who think you're wrong, who are mad at you. This is your
Mm.
base, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if the so I'm not I was involved with America First. I was a groyper, but that's been almost 5 years now, probably 3 or 4. The groyper movement is just basically people who follow Nicolas Fuentes, and I think Nick's following grew. He's grown over the years. The moment when I joined, from what I understand, the moment that he kind of went shot up and started becoming really popular was what they call the Groyper War in 2017.
Okay.
When basically they had a bunch of guys go and start asking Charlie Kirk questions at his campus tour in 2017. And a lot of Charlie's politics have changed since then, in no small part thanks to that movement, that continuing pushback from the more from America First and from the Groypers. At the time, Charlie had said things like we should staple a green card to every diploma, and he's obviously, before his tragic passing, had moderated that quite a bit and was speaking out publicly on how he thought we should cut back or get rid of H-1Bs. And he was bringing people on the tour with him who were openly homosexual in homosexual relationships, and I was never really, even before Charlie's passing, never looked into him a lot, but I think that from the outside it looked like he'd kind of changed that position, had significantly scaled that back, probably wouldn't be promoting that as a influence to young men anymore. But the Groyper movement, it's focus. It's called, Nick's show is called America First. I think there are a lot of problems with it. I have a lot of problems with it. The Groypers have some unfortunately, morally questionable parts within the fandom. It's very hard to nail them down because there's so many different parts. There's
Sure.
But the big overarching thought is that we should have America be first in our politics. We should cut off our relationship with Israel due to some of the things Israel has done, but also just due to the fact that we don't get the relationship is not fair. We don't get enough from them for what we give them. We need to have an immigration moratorium and mass deportations, and that America should be American in the sense that the historic American people have a right to America in ways that immigrants do not. Yeah.
Okay. What do you sympathize with a lot of the popular criticisms out there against the Groypers and Nick Fuentes, or do you think that they're
I do not sympathize with any of the popular criticisms. I don't think.
Okay.
I think the only popular,
the more popular, because he's accused of.
Anti-Semitism is the main one, right?
Yeah.
People are always accusing them of being anti-Semitic. I think there are probably anti-Semitic Groypers. I don't think that the movement itself or the ideology itself is anti-Semitic. Maybe not, last year at some point, I don't want to get into the online drama, but I'm just going to give you an example. Use some online drama as an example. Is last year at some point, Lila Rose had tweeted something to the effect of if you don't think the Jews should have their own country in Israel, you're being anti-Semitic in some way. And the point I replied to this, and the point I made was that Pius X, when asked by Theodor Herzl, the grandfather of Zionism, if the church would support Israel, like the Jews getting Palestine, was that Pius X said, no, you don't have a right to Palestine. You don't have a right to the Holy Land. You lost it when you rejected Christ. Do you have a right to, like, would we support you having a country? I can't remember the exact quotes, but it was kind of like a maybe, depending. But in Palestine, in the Holy Land, absolutely not. You do not have a right to that land. And so, like, I say that not to make Lila look bad, but to point out that the normie, to use the online term, because I think it fits here, it's an easy, good term to use, the normie position of what anti-Semitism would consist of in the church, you would have to accuse a sainted pope
Sure.
operating within his function as a head of state as being anti-Semitic, which I'm not comfortable with doing that. I don't think most Catholics are comfortable with doing that. So it seems to me that
ironically,
it
I
seems
think
to me
most
that
Catholics are probably comfortable doing that. I think that there's been this kind of browbeating attitude towards our own history, and a lot of, you talk to a lot of Catholics and they will look at something like the Holocaust and say, yeah, that Catholics contributed to those events through our history of anti-Semitism, like the programs and or pogroms and the blaming the Jews for crucifying Jesus and for, you know, ghettoizing them throughout the Middle Ages and all, you know, just this sort of general perception in the way that our history has been written for us, a lot of which isn't quite true, or at least not fully accurate. But it does seem to me that a lot of Catholics have no scruples about looking back at our history and being like, oh yeah, that's regrettable.
Yeah, you're probably right. Unfortunately, I'm not comfortable. I think that argument. I also think you could look at Aqua Primum by Benedict XIV, which was an encyclical, so it's a church document, which told the Polish people that they needed to scale back their involvement with the Jewish community in Poland because they were in danger of losing their Christian identity, you know, hiring and working for Jews. And so I think you can look at moments in church history, and I think you have to, I think you would have to do the thing you're talking about, where you'd have to be like, oh yeah, church history is wrong, or like we used to be anti-Semitic or whatever. And I don't think that's wise. I don't think it's appreciative of our history. I don't think it's historically informed. But yeah, no, so the main criticism of the Groypers seems to be that they're anti-Semitic in some way. I think there are Groypers who are anti-Semitic. I don't think Nick Fuentes is anti-Semitic. And I don't think that general anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. And I mean, Scott Hahn himself recently pointed out in a podcast that, like, just being anti-Zionist is not anti-Semitism.
No.
And he's kind of the expert in what Israel is. Yeah. And I think a large part of this comes from a massive historical illiteracy that somehow the religion, and there's two massive historical illiteracies. One of them's religious history illiteracy, and one of them is just general geopolitical historical illiteracy. The first one is that somehow the first belief, general belief accepted by most Christians in the United States, and probably the majority of Catholics, is that modern Judaism is the same religion that was practiced in Israel at the time of Jesus. But this is simply not true. You know, the Talmud, which is one of their holy books, didn't exist for 500 years after Jesus, and in fact includes parts which condemn Jesus to hell, condemn our Lord to hell. So modern Judaism is a religion which is younger than Christianity and explicitly blasphemes the Savior. That's the first one, right? That this religion is somehow the one that's always existed.
They are still descended from the ancient Israelites. Like they are still the tribe of Judah, and yes, it's taken on a different form. But no, your point stands. Like the Talmud is it's younger than Christianity. And rabbinic Judaism as sort of like the defining approach to that religious practice is quite distinct. Like synagogue Judaism isn't the same as temple Judaism, certainly.
Right. That's the point I'm
Yeah.
making. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the second historical illiteracy is just that, like, the idea that the current nation state of Israel invented in 1948 is somehow the same nation that, like, King Herod and King David ruled over, which is just
Yeah.
also, with any amount of critical thinking, not true. And
Well, and they didn't really rule it. They were subordinated to the Roman Empire.
yeah, well, Herod
So-
was. David was not.
Oh, sorry, not David. Yes, of course,
Yeah.
not David. Yeah, so David's a different time period, obviously. But yeah, at the time of Jesus, it's also worth noting that, like, their inheritance of the promised land was contingent upon their right worship of God, right? And their
Right, which is what
fidelity
Pius
to the law.
X was saying. Pius X was saying, like, hey, the Jews lose the Holy Land when they refuse to follow God. You have refused to follow God. Therefore, you have lost the Holy Land. We will not support you. Like, we're not going to support you taking the Holy Land back from the Mohammedans when you've lost it as a
Who
consequence
took
of
it
your
from
refusal.
Christians? They didn't take it from
Who
Jews.
take it from Christians, right? Yeah, we have a better claim to it than you do. We're not going to support you owning it. And of course, that's like a political stance. It's not an infallible stance, right? And Francis and Benedict and John Paul all kind of shifted. They thought that the Jews had, they supported Israel as some type of, nation state and it protecting itself. However, that's still not an infallible stance, right? And so the point is, we've got multiple very holy pontiffs who have had two completely different positions on this, right? And so to accuse co-religionists, fellow Catholics, fellow Christians of a sin, of some type of bigotry or hatred of your brother, of another human, for holding positions similar to what sainted popes have held, I think I think that's beyond the pale. I don't think that's an acceptable paradigm to be operating in. So that's the main one, and I just don't agree with that at all. I think the other one is
let me
racism.
jump in on that
but
point, though. So, like, just to share perspective from, like, another generation, right? So the way that I grew up and the way that Gen X and certainly my parents grew up was as a sort of a horrified reaction and a lot of guilt associated with that to what happened with the Holocaust, right? Either because you were closer to proximity to it, say, like, if you have German heritage or something like that, or you were one of the neighboring countries who were kind of indifferent to what was going on, or maybe like Polish heritage would be another one. Like, Poles aren't to blame for what happened, but it occurred in their country, right? Like some of the more horrific abuses, and so it became the defining evil, I think, in our perception of history. Because prior to, like, the 20th century, we were going through this age of enlightenment and liberalism and sort of this breakdown of sort of the moral fabric of society. And so we didn't have kind of the language to talk about right and wrong necessarily. But then the horrors of the 20th century occur, and we can at least say, well, that was definitely wrong, and the people who perpetrated it were wrong, right? So in the aftermath of World War II and in the aftermath of the Holocaust, all of a sudden people have regained a kind of language to describe evil and to say, well, you live your life your way and I'll live my life my way, but we definitely can't go down that particular path in any way, shape, or form, right? So things like racism, for example, became like the cardinal sin of our society, and this is how we were raised to think of those things. And the worst form of racism was anti-Semitism because of what happened in the Holocaust. Because if you're not careful about that, all of a sudden 6 million people are gassed and murdered, right? In an event that was so significant that's where we get the word genocide from, right?
Yeah. Well, so the Holocaust was the founding myth of the 20th century in the post-liberal global order, right? The Holocaust, every society has a founding myth, right? The Old Testament Israelites' founding myth was the judges and then King David and King Saul and King David, right? I'm not saying it's not true. The point I'm making is that it happened, and that's your founding myth. the United States of America's founding myth is the Revolutionary
story
War.
that permeates and that influences everybody's thinking in a
Yes,
general
yeah,
sense.
yeah. You know, the United States founding myth was the Revolutionary War, and then it was the Civil War, and then it was we defeated the Holocaust, and now the entire global order, the like globally, the global order, global society we live in now, its founding myth is we stopped the Holocaust, so we can't be racist. We have to, you know, treat everyone the same.
Sure.
And it's also like the founding myth of that of a what I would call a state religion of this world order, whose deity is the divine equity. The idea that like
Sure.
the Imago Dei is the tabula rasa, which is just not true, right? Like that if you're made in the image of God, you're a blank slate. Everyone's the same. And so I think you're right. I think that the danger of that is, you know, there was this post that Seth Dillon, the CEO of the Babylon Bee, made a couple months ago, 6 or 7 months ago, I want to say, where he was talking about 7 questions to figure out if you're woke right. Right. And one of the questions was like questioning historical narratives, you know, and I think he listed the Holocaust as an example, if I recall, but it was very clear that even if he didn't list it, that's what he meant. Right. And I was like, look, I can accept everything. I can and do accept the general narrative of the Holocaust. It does not follow then that I have to take the same lessons from it that you did. You cannot just say, because this thing happened, all of my worldview is correct. You would have to demonstrate how one follows from the other. And I think this is not unique to the Groypers. This is generally the younger right wing of politics and in the church is like, yeah, I don't see why we need to be giving these people money, why we have to support this country, why we're fighting wars that will help them when we are not as immediately helped by them. You know,
and I think that's a narrative that a lot of people can sympathize with if it's kept to the question of like Israel, support for Israel, military, economic, otherwise. You know, the lobbying question. These are the things that like Nick Fuentes addresses, and he discusses in a way that I think isn't shocking to people, especially older people, right? Like he got into Tucker Carlson and he outlined a lot of those things, and you go, okay, yeah, that's not unreasonable, even if I disagree with it, but there's all these little breadcrumbs that he kind of leaves lying around, some more explicit than others, some louder than others. Even within that interview, he said, you know, like I love Stalin and I celebrate his birthday. And you have to go, what? What?
Yeah.
What are you
so
talking
I think
about?
I think these are the less mainstream, because people want to focus on the anti-Semitism and the racism accusations because they're the original sin of our society.
Side comes from like celebrating Hitler, for example, right?
Right.
Like, which was another thing that, again, for our generation, it was like, well, I don't know a lot about right and wrong, but I know that he was the most evil person who ever lived. That was just sort of the standard understanding that everybody had. And that if you were to ever express anything approaching sympathy for Nazi Germany, you would be anathema among your peer group, among like you would just that you might as well say, you know, I'm evil myself, right? Because that was the one defining feature of evil was that character and the things that they did historically. So when people from my generation and older hear somebody even jokingly say, "Oh yeah, Hitler was super based, man," we go, "Well, you're clearly evil." And there's no other question to be asked here about this, right? And it really does shut down the conversation. And I'm not saying that, like, for our generation, that's how we should be responding, but it's hard to get yourself outside of that paradigm when it's shaped your entire, you know, upbringing and worldview and approach to politics and you know the cultural dimensions of all of this.
I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying it's okay that he's saying that, because I think it's not okay to say Hitler was super cool or whatever. But
yeah, I don't even know if he's actually said things like that.
When the founding myth of a society which has dispossessed your entire generation and your children and and hates you for being white and male, proposes a devil who whose entire worldview was, because you're white and male, you are worth, you have worth, you're good for society. Inevitably, someone is going to go, oh, you guys all say you hate me, and your founding myth is this guy who said that he likes me. Inevitably, eventually, somebody's going to go, I like that guy and not you. Right? And I don't want to make it like he's got agents, Nick has agencies. Everybody, people who say these things have agency. They should be more nuanced and historically literate on these things, I think. But to just blame them for it because they're evil is like, no, I'm sorry, that's not what's going on. You've raised an entire generation. Like, I don't want to do the whole like, oh, look, woe is me thing, but like, I'm in a public high school, zealous convert to Catholicism, unapologetically Christian, unapologetically Catholic, unapologetically conservative. The homosexual or same-sex attracted students who were liberal, who ostracized me, did not do it alone. Most of the time they did it with the implicit or explicit approval of the teachers in some way. And that's just, and once again, I'm not like complaining about, oh, I'm 26 now, man. The high school years are like we're fine. I've gotten over that stuff. But when you do that to an entire generation, eventually someone's going to go, I hate you, and I like the guy who said that he liked me.
Right.
And that's not shocking. Like if it wasn't happening at this point, I would be more surprised than the fact that it is, to be quite honest. And this is one of those things again where, like we were talking about kind of near the beginning, we were talking about like when you're talking to an individual, you need to give individual solutions, individual ideas. But when you're looking at a collective problem, you have to be willing to acknowledge the societal pressures that resulted in the collective problem. So when you're talking to an individual young man who says, I really like Hitler, you should talk to him as an individual and try to convince him otherwise.
Yeah.
When you're looking at a whole group of young men who really like Hitler, well, something has gone wrong societally. And to blame them for a society which hated them is going to result in them being more convinced that they are correct and they should like him. Yeah.
So what do you think, again, people from my generation who are just can't get over the shock of that, someone saying, I like Hitler, I think he was super cool. What do you think the response to that should be? Is it societal? Is it merely that? Is it to take a guy like Nick Fuentes more seriously? Is it to try and help groypers see the light? Like what do you think it is?
I think it's a part of it is like thinking historically, right? Like I hear you saying like that shocks me. So let me ask you a question, right? If America was pulled into a war that they didn't want to be in, and then forced to take responsibility for the war, the government was overthrown and ruled by communists who are putting strip clubs in the same towns, in the same street as schools. And so the government that signed all of the debt onto you and your children, or I guess this would be happening in Canada, is in charge now, and they're telling you you're evil and they're telling you you're bad, and they're creating this super degenerate society. And then somebody came along and said, actually, this is not our fault. We're not going to pay that debt anymore. And everybody who tells you that you're at fault is wrong. Would you at least consider voting for that guy?
Is this merely hypothetical, or are we?
No, this is literally what happened in Germany.
Oh,
right?
I see what
Germany
you're saying.
didn't want to be involved in World War I. You can look at it. The German Kaiser was the last world leader in Europe trying to stop it from happening. and the
Sure.
King of England the King of England, who was his cousin, by the way, was refusing to take his phone calls.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
but it was internal as well. I mean, this could be a distraction in the conversation, but like Kaiser Wilhelm had actually issued a halt, so they had mobilized the German army and they were marching towards Belgium, right? And he got cold feet and said, "Well, let's not do this," right? Because he saw maybe he saw where this was headed, and I can't remember who it was, but one of his generals said, "No, once this machine is started, you can't turn it off. It's too late." So
and that's
him
why I
as
was
this
calling,
sort of like war mongering figure who was dedicated to flexing his muscle the entire time. Yeah, that's not accurate for sure.
Well, and Buchanan in his book Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War points out that the British propaganda that the Kaiser was super warmongering and like trying to conquer all of Europe is like laughable, because Britain had been involved in something like 2 or 3 times the amount of wars in the previous 40 years as Germany had, you know. And then to the reason that the Treaty of Versailles got signed is because Britain enforced a starvation blockade on the German civilian food lines, which starved them into electing the Weimar Republic, that then signed the treaty and put them under all this debt. And then this guy came along and said, this isn't right.
Yeah, there was a lot of grievance that was exploited at the time, and I think that there's a lesson in that to learn. In that,
that's what I'm saying. The lesson is like, you're looking at it at the time. That's what I'm saying, right? Like I would ask people who are like recoiling from this idea to put themselves in the position of the everyday German. And
I don't think that's hard to do, but I think with the hindsight that we have now, to see people today looking back and saying, I don't think Hitler was all that bad. I think that's the thing that people find inexcusable.
Right. But the point I'm making is that they are not. These people are also tend to be Holocaust deniers, right?
Okay.
So you're going to have to, if you want to convince them otherwise, you're going to have to get in their head and figure out why they believe the things they believe. And so the Holocaust isn't occurring, like is not in the math because they've written it off. And so but you can't just fix that by insisting that you can't just fix it by saying over and over again that it happened. You're going to have to figure out another way to convince them, or you're going to, and what's more likely to happen, what's a more likely, more convincing thing to do is to offer them alternatives to this worldview, to offer them alternatives to, look, what you probably like about Hitler is the domestic policies of the National Socialist movement, and the ways he improved Germany and the lives of Germans. We as Christians do not need that political ideology because we have political ideologies, right? And that's what it was for me, right? Like, I think I've been open about this on other shows, candidly. Like, I was in this position, right? I read Mein Kampf. I didn't believe in the Holocaust, and I thought I wouldn't have called myself a Nazi, but I would identify, because it was a dumb thing, but it was like Nazism is a German movement. I would identify that as a National Socialist because I was looking at the only society, the first society to come out of the Great Depression was Germany, and the first country to come out of the Great Depression was Germany, and I couldn't find in Catholicism political, like I didn't know where it was, and then I found out the political things, and it allowed me to come down off the defensiveness of all that, right? And so just school-marming them is going to push them further inward. It's going to make them less likely to listen to you.
Well, a big part of the challenge too is that the modern and postmodern world only has, and it's convinced itself of this, I think, that there are only 2 paths. There's the collective and there's the individualistic. There's socialism or there's liberalism. And liberalism is a word that, gets confused, and so you have to be careful about that. But liberalism today gets associated with the left. But historically what it meant was that just liberty is our highest good, basically, right? Liberty being freedom. So when we talk about conservatism in the United States, like slogans that have to do with freedom are often associated with conservatism or the Republican Party, but that's not what conservatism is about at all. Like true, like historical philosophical conservatism was about like the Ancien Regime. It was about what happened prior to the French Revolution. That was what they wanted to conserve. They wanted a hierarchical, integrated society where everybody had a role and everybody had a duty to their brother. And that virtue was held in the highest esteem, right? All of that was stripped away by liberalism to the point where there was no more sort of moral guiding principles. There was no more like singular kind of cultural identity, and that's where we get sort of this flattening of society from, and also
Quadragesimo Anno talks about this a lot.
Sorry,
this is Quadragesimo Anno.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So
Quadragesimo Anno mostly focused on this, yeah.
So he's looking at these two paths of socialism and liberalism, and he's saying, you know, these are not, they're both wrong. They're both seriously flawed. And unfortunately, in the modern world we live in, that's all that's on offer, or at least that's what's being proposed for people who are less historically and philosophically, philosophically fluent. But the church does have an alternative to all of this. But the problem is it's not being taught well. Like Catholic, we have institutions that could teach this stuff. We have Catholic schools in which people are being raised to supposedly inherit the Catholic culture that is part of our heritage. But, you know, I went to Catholic schools, ironically, even though I wasn't Catholic, because that was the public school system in the city I grew up in. And there's no way we would learn any actual theology or anything like that. Our religion class was a world religions class. We didn't learn, obviously, the Catholic social teaching. And so, you know, you have to come by it on your own and through your own study. So that to me seems like the solution that might be an antidote to the problems that we're perceiving in various movements and various reactions within younger people, is to sort of say, hey, there actually is an alternative. It's not socialism. It's not liberalism. It's far more sophisticated than either of the two. And how do we construct a political theory out of that, I suppose?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to start with some things that, I think you're right. And this is what happened to me, right? Like I was really far gone and I found the Catholic social teaching. I realized I didn't need to be supplementing the faith. I was supplementing the faith because I didn't know that I thought I had to, right? I didn't feel like I had a choice. And I guess the main thing that the start of it for me was and a lot of this comes back to economic disenfranchisement. But a lot of the start of it for me was just like the parts of the economics, the things that Catholic social teaching allows economically, which are heresy in the American Republican Party, you know? And just as an example, right? Like,
and it's
the church,
easy to accuse it of being socialism.
It does often. It often gets accused of being socialism, right? Just an example, the social teaching in no uncertain terms, a lot says that the right to private property is not absolute, right? And that man views the Christian man views his property as common property, and that you have the reason for property is for the common destination of all goods is that you own property so that you can more efficaciously use it for the common good, right?
Well, there are some distinctions in there because so like you mentioned Quadragesimo Anno, and he makes the distinction between private property that is owned but then its use, right? So he says that, like, you know, the government doesn't have the right to confiscate private property or even to tax it into oblivion so that it basically becomes useless, but it does have the right to regulate its use, right? So you can own property, but as soon as you start to use capital, so to speak, then there is a public interest in that, and it does start to affect the interests of the common good.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we need an update of this.
And there have been updates.
Even more updated than Centesimos.
Is what, 1931?
1931, and Centesimus is
Yeah.
1991. I
Yeah.
think we need an update for it in the economy that is based on the financial sector, because the ownership of it is also its use, right?
Sure.
The ownership
Yeah,
of
it's
a
a lot
stock
more complicated now.
is its use, right? Like to
Yeah.
own a stock is to be allowing it to make money from the use of money, right? Which is an interesting phrase that I think you might find in Aquinas under a definition of usury, actually.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know, and so I agree with you, but the thing I'm getting more at is like the to for example, in America, the 10% most wealthy people own 80% of the stock market,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the stock market is doubling because of the way the Fed is injecting money into the economy. The first people who get dibs on it are the people in the stock market, which tends to be 80% of the time the 10% most wealthy people, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of, to me, sounds like a preferential option for the rich, which is the opposite of what we're told we
Sure.
need in a Catholic social
Sure.
teaching, which is a preferential option for the poor.
Yeah.
And and the things they own are also not. I don't think that I don't think I agree. Like this is I'm going to steal this from Jacob Imam and Mark Barnes in their essay on the stock market, but I don't think you can be properly said to be owning a stock, because
Mm.
it's not a thing which can be owned, I don't think, right? Because you can't.
It's abstract. Yeah.
It's abstract, and it's not like a horse that you have to take care of. It just sits there, right?
Mm.
Um, and
It's
you
a lot
can't.
like modern currency in some respects.
Yeah, yeah.
Certainly, Canadian currency is much worse in this regard because we have no gold assets, for example. Like we have
Neither do
nothing
we.
backing our currency. Well,
Neither do
the
we
United States
anymore.
does have a supply of gold. We have none in Canada,
Yeah,
but it's not backing
I'm
our
a
currency
conspiracy
anymore.
theory. I'm a conspiracy theorist on this. I'm not. I mean, we have some
Okay,
gold. I'm not convinced that it's the amount they say we have.
fair
Because
enough.
Trump's first thing was like, I'm going to go look at the gold in Fort Knox. That was like a thing he said he was going to do like his first week, and it just disappeared mysteriously. So
Okay.
the visit to Fort Knox just didn't happen all of a sudden, which is weird.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's not backing our currency, you know.
Yeah.
And I saw a chart today that was really interesting. That since the 90s, I think it was, that if you were to do wages in like amount of gold per hour, it's down. Like
Oh yeah.
wages,
Yeah.
based on real currency is down. Like
Yeah.
you make less money.
Yes. Yeah.
But this is, I'll come back to this. The thing I'm saying about like property is like the kind of things we call property in the legalistic regime of private property, I don't think would be considered. Like I think the church's social teaching needs some updating and
Yeah. Yeah.
some development in the area of abstract commodities,
Sure.
financial assets.
Sure. Yeah, in the time of Quadragesimo Anno, like money had definite value. It was tangible in a certain sense, right? And so there weren't these kinds of concepts of capital that were more about giving you certain access to aspects of the economy, and that's really all they do, rather than something that could be definitely traded or exchanged
Yeah.
for definite value. Yeah.
And the other thing, like you're saying, Quadragesimo Anno says you can't tax or take private property, but that assumes you own it, right?
Yeah.
And
It doesn't say you can't tax, but it does say that you can't tax
right,
it to
you
the
can't
point
tax
of
it
like
to
confiscate it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that assumes the church's definition of ownership.
Sure.
And to give you an example, Bill Gates owns more farmland in America than anyone else.
Yeah.
Bill Gates is not working on that farmland. He owns it as a commodity, which makes him money.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think, and people can push back on this, but I don't think, based on the church's definition of property, that that's real ownership. You know?
No. Yeah. And the church talks about, and I think Quadragesimo addresses this about this idea of vacant property, is something that in theory, can be occupied and put to good use, right? And so
Yeah.
if a person comes, like if a farm is abandoned for all intents and purposes, if someone comes along, it starts to cultivate it and build it up and create fruits of that labor. He essentially owns that. I mean, it does become his property
Yeah.
due by
Yeah,
justice.
that's
And
the kind of stuff I'm talking
fruits
about.
from his labor are appropriately to his benefit.
Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about when I say like private property isn't absolute. I don't think the legal thing we call private property in the United States that we say we have a right to absolutely, which can never be infringed upon in some way. Like I don't think that agrees with the church's definition of property. I don't think that you can properly own something like a mortgage-backed security or whatever, because it's just a collection of numbers that you can't do work on it, right? Like Leo the 13th defines work very specifically as like changing something and forming it in your image. And to just read about a thing isn't doing work on it. No one would say when I read a book on the functions of the United States government that I'm working on the United States government, right? No one would say that if I read a book on how the tax code works, that is the doing the work, like I'm changing the tax code, right? Effort and work are not the same thing in the Catholic social teaching. And if you can't do work on something, if you can't form something in your image, in participation of the creative act, the way God does, you don't own that thing in the mind of the church. And in that way, if the temporal power were to say, look, you don't own this thing in a proper way, you can't work on it, and it's also just because you have a piece of paper doesn't mean you have an absolute right to it. And actually your possession of this piece of paper that says you have a right to it and the way you're using it is harming society, the temporal power would be within their rights and within their duties to just revoke that or change that situation in some way in the favor of the poor.
If the thing you supposedly own is just an agreement, well, agreements can be adjusted by due legislators or people with legitimate power. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, and we could probably spend a lot of more time on it. I guess I wanted to ask you just briefly, like what are you up to now? You mentioned the Chastity Project. How's that going?
As well. Yeah, we're doing well. So
okay.
Do you
want to plug anything that you guys are up to these days?
I can't. Let me think. Well, we're doing just doing shorts. We're doing a bunch of shorts right now. We're just trying to get into the short form content, perfect it, work on it. So go check that out. And then I do my own thing on the Sanity Revolt YouTube channel. So just go to youtube.com/@SanityRevolt and look me up there. I try to stream once a week.
Your own content regularly.
Yeah, I publish my own content. I stream once a week. I didn't stream the last 2 weeks because I was out of town for football games. So go Hoosiers. But then also just follow me on Twitter @TheSanityRevolt on Twitter as well. So
okay, very good. What do you have a departing message for what you think the church could do today, and especially the church? Because I mean, we've talked a lot about politics, but what is the role of the church in encouraging, let's say, your generation today, and ways that they could instill more hope? I would say.
I think the number one thing that could be done by the church today, I think the USCCB should examine the catechism on immigration and take seriously the preeminent concern and the conditions of immigration, of common good, of the citizenry. We didn't get to talk about a lot about immigration, but I think immigration is the core of every problem we have in America, including abortion. And I think what the church could do most is, instead of scolding young men for looking at society and saying something's wrong, is look at their concerns honestly. And I don't think that the church, especially the hierarchy in the United States, is doing so. I don't think it's even close to doing so.
Okay. Well, maybe we can dive into that more deeply in another future episode. But
that would be great.
But yeah, I want to thank you, the man who is Thursday, Josiah. Thanks for doing this, and we'll look forward to hopefully another opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Okay, thanks for watching that. I hope that that was a blessing to you, that it encouraged you and edified you in your journey with the Lord. And if it did, and if you want to support the work that we're doing as a result, which thank you so much for considering that, because we really do need your help to make this viable. Then there's a few ways you can do that. You can go to brianholdsworth.ca/help, which is obviously my website. And there's some options there. One is to just contribute through my website. The other would be to join us over on Locals, where you can interact with me and other like-minded people. You can gain access to exclusive content, where we're doing live streams and I'm uploading videos and things like that. But we're also doing a secret philosophy study with a secret philosopher academic who's joining us once a month to take us through difficult texts that we want to read on our own, but we need some clarification and some guidance on that. So right now we're working through some works by St. Thomas Aquinas with him, and he's a Thomistic philosopher. So if that's interesting to you, join me on brianholdsworth.locals.com. And again, you can check out my website at brianholdsworth.ca/help.